Welcome to the Pregnancy Help Podcast. I'm Christine Grimmett, joined today by Heartbeat International President Jor-El Godsey. And in this episode, we're taking a closer look at a significant legal case out of New Jersey. The state's Attorney General, Matthew Platkin, has demanded that First Choice Women's Resource Centers turn over confidential documents, which is a move that raises serious concerns for pregnancy centers everywhere. Heartbeat International filed an amicus brief on behalf of First Choice as their case now heads to the Supreme Court. So to tell that story and explain why this matters to pro-lifers, we're joined by First Choice Executive Director Aimee Huber, along with her attorney from Alliance Defending Freedom, Lincoln Wilson. Before we get started, I'd like to remind our listeners that Pregnancy Help News has also covered and continues to cover this and other pro-life cases on pregnancyhelpnews.com. So if you're not yet subscribed to their weekly digest, be sure to click on the link in the show notes to do that. Jor-El, thank you for joining us today and leading our conversation. I'll turn things on over to you.
Oh, thank you, Christine. Well, Aimee Huber, I have you with us. I'm so glad that you're able to join us. We've been connected friends for probably more than 2 decades. I think you've been executive director for more than 3 decades. Is that right?
That's right.
I recall. Yeah, quite some time. You've been a phenomenal leader. I know you've grown First Choice into a just an amazing organization with multiple locations. And the way I understand it, you were kind of minding your own business, doing ministry, continue to serve the Lord and impacting the community the way you do. And suddenly you woke up one morning squarely on the mind of A.G. Platkin. So how did you find that out? Like that's not something we expect to find out when we wake up and start our morning.
That is not something we expect to find out. I agree. Thanks for having me, Jor-El. It's just a joy to be here. So it was November 15th, 2023, and actually our centers were closed for the day to clients because we were calling all of our donors to thank them for supporting us. And in the middle of the morning, a representative from the Attorney General's office came to our office, asked for me, proceeded to hand me a pile of paper that was a subpoena, commanding us to release up to 10 years of documentation on our donor communications, donors' identities, advertising, interactions with Heartbeat and International, for one, just about everything that you can think of. And there were no allegations of wrongdoing. It was simply a horrible, oppressive fishing expedition.
So there's a name for this. I mean, we've seen it in California ourselves, like a civil investigative order, if I recall.
Yes.
Lincoln's joining us as well. Maybe there's a more New Jersey-specific descriptor for that.
Yeah, in New Jersey, they're just called subpoenas, but civil investigative demand is, I think, probably what you've seen in California, and a lot of states have those. They really do the same thing, and they present huge potential for abuse in the hands of an ideologically motivated attorney general like you have in New Jersey, and opportunities to harass and demand really sensitive material from donors like the attorney general has done here.
Yeah, and we agree that it's ripe for phishing, right? And like they're looking for a problem with which to then maybe move to another level. But wide and expansive authority that the AG has to do this, and as Lincoln, as you said, if they're ideologically motivated, and we're sadly seeing more and more of that could be a challenge. But I wanted people to understand, to make sure that it doesn't necessarily come in the form of a lawsuit, but it surely presents as such. Like, so what did you do next? Like, what was the next thing? You got handed a pile of papers, and what was your first thought, and then what did you do following that?
Well, I was shocked, and yet I wasn't surprised at the same time, to be honest, because the attack against pregnancy centers in New Jersey had been going for some time, and I remember thinking to myself, okay, this is the latest, and it came to our doorstep. So I scanned the subpoena, and I sent it to Ann O'Connor from NIFLA and asked her what I should do, and she called me and said, Aimee, with your permission, I would like to contact Alliance Defending Freedom and see if they would be interested in representing you. And I was familiar with Alliance Defending Freedom because about 1.5 years before, we had joined the Church and Ministry Alliance just in case something crazy happened in the state of New Jersey. And so when she asked, I said, of course. And she did contact ADF, and she called me the next day and said, Aimee, ADF is interested in representing you. They are seeing this as a pattern in the blue states. And I remember where I was when she called me, and I remember thinking, oh my, It's just got bigger than us.
Well, and we appreciate Alliance Defending Freedom. We've been clients of theirs in years past, and grateful for the fact that they do have that Church and Ministry Alliance. That's been an excellent resource that they've expanded to include pregnancy centers in recent years. So
Yes.
good on you for being prepared, at least for that, with that connection. We certainly encourage that for every pregnancy center to make that connection with ADF CMA group and just have that kind of assurance. Like you could have, certainly it helps that you talked to Ann at NIFLA, she being a New Jersey attorney
Yes.
herself, but even with her own New Jersey licensing, she was quick to bring ADF into the conversation. So what happened next? Like, so ADF, so they all showed up at your office the next day. How did that work?
Not quite. We did connect on a Zoom call. We talked more about what the options might include, and I went to my board of directors, and they got on a Zoom call within 24 hours, and I presented the options, and they were ready to go and unanimously voted to retain ADF and to fight the legal battle that really we never intended to fight. It's a little ironic because anyone who knows me, other pregnancy center directors just laughed because I was always the one who just wanted to serve the women and not talk to the media and not extend myself legislatively. I didn't want to be distracted from our mission of serving women. And so it was ironic that while we would not have chosen this, God chose us. And so the question rapidly became, what are we going to do to this calling and how are we going to be obedient to him and faithful to him? So that started the journey. And boy, it's been almost 2 years now since we were served the subpoena. So definitely a marathon and not a sprint.
Absolutely. And I certainly resonate with that idea that so many of our pregnancy center leaders are just looking to help women, love them into life-affirming decisions, and not necessarily fight the fights that are going on the political spectrum. But then we are dealing in the mission field created by abortion, and that creates some abortion distortion amongst our politics and all kinds of things. So Lincoln, and now, so it's not just getting the subpoena. You actually then had to turn around, as I understand, you had to sue the AG in this endeavor. Is that accurate?
That's right. And that's what the Supreme Court is focusing on right now. We thought that the things that the AG was demanding were really violating First Choice's constitutional rights. It was retaliating against First Choice for its pro-life speech. And more importantly, demanding constitutionally protected information from First Choice, like the identities of its donors, which is what one of the things that the Attorney General says he needs. And that was something that we said we should be able to get a federal court to decide that this is unlawful. And so we filed a lawsuit in federal court, but then found ourselves getting kicked out of court, basically, because the court said there was no jurisdiction. It said we had to go to state court first. And that's really what the dispute's about when we're up in the U.S. Supreme Court right now.
Whether you belong in the state or this indeed is a First Amendment issue before the Supreme Court. Is that correct?
Yeah, basically. So, this is something that the civil rights laws were created to protect, is that if a state government violates your constitutional rights, you can go to a federal court for redress. And the idea is that federal courts are going to be less prone to bias than state officials might be in state courts. We were told kind of the opposite, which is that actually you have to go to state court to do this before you can come to federal court. And then if you go to state court first and you fight your case and you lose, well, then you don't get a second bite at the apple and you get and go to federal court. In other words, you never get to go to federal court is basically what they're telling us. And that creates a huge opportunity for abuse, where state attorneys general, if they learn that and they're, like we said, ideologically motivated, they can say, well, all I need to do is use one of these subpoenas or civil investigative demands to demand donor IDs from people, and then they will never be able to challenge me in federal court, and they'll be stuck in the state courts where I'm like the hometown hero. So it's a really dangerous situation for a lot of organizations, and we're happy to be able to fight it in the Supreme Court for First Choice.
That's excellent, Lincoln. I appreciate you helping us understand how it's a path of attack for any of the abortion state AGs against pregnancy centers, and it's important to clarify these things. I'm going to get to the journeys of the Supreme Court in just a moment, but I really want to highlight this idea that you're being contacted by a elected official, a very highly place elected official in the state, asking all of these questions through a subpoena. And sometimes, like, we're always, as pregnancy centers, we're always trying to avoid lawsuits. We're doing everything we can to make sure that we're not in the path of a lawsuit. But you had to take the action to file a lawsuit like that. That was an important step. It was one of the options that you considered. I assume that there were others, but you had to turn it into an action against the AG. I just want to clarify that point, and if you can add any understanding as to why that's a necessary path, Lincoln.
Yeah, it was really that if we didn't, then we'd be stuck in his system, playing by his rules, and we'd be stuck in the state courts, and we'd be giving into exactly what he's trying to accomplish. I think Aimee pointed out, she said that, she's just here trying to serve women, and why was she the target of this? I think that's exactly why she was the target, because if they can bring down someone who's just minding their own business and trying to help women, then they can make all the pregnancy centers in New Jersey fear that they're going to be next. And
Yep.
First Choice was an ideal target for him in that respect. Now, that was exactly why we thought we had to stand up and basically send a message that this sort of thing is not going to fly. You can't make these kind of demands from people and just get them to bargain away their constitutional rights. It's offensive to the First Amendment to ask this. And so we need to stand up for those rights, because they will go away if you don't stand up for them. And we need to make sure that he's held to account.
Yeah, excellent point. Now, what exactly is the AG asking for with these donor records? Like, what is it? What is his expressed intent for those records?
It's really kind of absurd, but he says his theory is that First Choice's website, its client-facing website, is might lead people into thinking that it's an abortion clinic, and people might be giving to First Choice under the belief that it's an abortion clinic, and that when they see all the pictures of happy families and babies when they submit their donation, they might actually think they're giving to a Planned Parenthood when they're really not. And so he says he needs the names not only of the people who gave through that website, but everyone who didn't give through First Choice's dedicated donor website. So he says if you attended First Choice's annual banquet, if you gave through a baby bottle campaign, he says, I need to know your name, because you might have been deceived when you went to that banquet. You thought you were at a Planned Parenthood dinner, and it turns out you weren't. So he wants all the names of all those people so he can call them up and make sure, did you know that you were actually giving to a pregnancy center, a pro-life pregnancy center? And that's the theory of deception that he's going after here. Now, the fact that it's absurd shows you what this is really about. It's really about, he wants to intimidate people. Because you can imagine how the average donor to a pregnancy center is going to feel when they get a call from someone at the Attorney General's office saying, do you know you've been donating to a pregnancy center? As soon as they clear it up, they're going to say, what have I been doing wrong? It's intended to discourage people, and we think it's reprehensible, and we got to put a stop to it.
Yeah, so it's crazy. Absurd, I think, is the right word. I think that's being kind. There's others I can think of that would go along with that description, but that's just crazy. And partly we've heard some of this. This has been a donor information has been litigated already, even before the Supreme Court, as I recall,
Yep.
with the state of California, and I'm sure others. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm sure you have other cases and citations that reflect this very fact, and it just points out that it's just a highly aggressive, abortion-oriented AG in this situation.
That's right. And we actually represented the Thomas More Center, my colleague John Birch, before the U.S. Supreme Court on that first donor privacy case that was about when the California Attorney General said that all nonprofits had to disclose their list of their biggest donors. And the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in our favor and protected those rights. And that was a great decision. And basically what you're seeing now is that state AGs who are hostile are just pivoting to the next step. It's like, well, if we can't demand it from everyone as just part of their general filings, let's demand it in specific. Let's target specific organizations that we want it from, and then maybe we can get around this. And we're here to show, hopefully, that they can't do that.
Well, we certainly hope that as well. So you filed a lawsuit. You were rebuffed by the lower court, and first you had the opportunity to file, what do they call it, certiorari?
Certiorari, yeah.
Yeah, like that's not an easy thing to. I mean, you can file easily, but it's not an easy thing to expect. And so I know that that's been a journey as well. You've been very intent, and of course we're standing here and you got accepted, but it's not as simple as that.
No, you're right. These things always feel like a long shot. And then when you get there, sometimes it feels like it was inevitable. How could they not have granted review? We thought that this case did have all the necessary ingredients. It was actually our second petition for certiorari in the case. We had an earlier one that went up at an earlier stage of the case and was not successful. But they bit on the second time around, really on this question that there's been multiple different decisions from lower courts about whether this kind of a challenge to a subpoena has a right to go into federal court first, or if it has to first be litigated in state court. And we worked to really refine that issue as being something that the lower courts are split on and that the Supreme Court needs to provide clarity on. And that was ultimately the ticket that got the Supreme Court to accept it. And, you always cross your fingers when you do these things, and you pray, and it's a definition of a Hail Mary. But the Lord answered it, and we're glad to see it. And without divulging client confidence, I know that the morning we called Aimee up to let her know that they granted, she was just squealing with joy because it was such a wonderful news.
Well, she had invited all of us to pray with her that this was a possibility. So we were squealing at our own moments when we heard the good news that this was being accepted. I want to touch just briefly. Yeah, there is a very interesting dynamic between the power of the state, and as far as the state judiciary versus the federal judiciary, and we're in, Heartbeat is in some battles regarding APR, abortion pill reversal, in the states of California and New York. We are in those state courts, and yet some of our friends, NIFLA and some of our affiliates, have been working the conversation from a federal perspective, and it just highlights to me a couple of things, Lincoln. One is that there is a difference that you have to navigate, and that's part of what you're really trying to get the court to really clarify here. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I think that's right. We have federal courts for specific purposes, and one of their purposes is to uphold federal constitutional rights and ensure that the Constitution is followed by state officials. And the First Amendment provides bedrock guarantees that the Attorney General violated with respect to several different aspects of this demand against Aimee. And you need to be able to get federal redress for those decisions, because if you go through the state court system, then the only time you might ever get to a federal court is to the U.S. Supreme Court at the very end of the process, when you're on another one of those Hail Mary petitions for certiorari. We think that there should be a right to go into federal court from the beginning to protect your federal constitutional rights. And we think it's pretty well settled that the right exists. It's just that for some reason, courts have carved off this one type of case as the one area where it doesn't apply.
Great. So, Aimee, what's the feeling? What's the timeline ahead for you, for our friends at ADF? Like, I know we're excited about SCOTUS. Is there a date? What are we putting on our calendars to be praying for you guys?
Thank you. We don't have an exact date now. We trust that it will be in December, our oral argument hearing date, and we're anxiously awaiting for that exact day. And then we expect a decision by June of 2026.
Yeah, that would be when the court's session is ending. So we've seen that rhythm in the past, going back to NIFLA in 2018 and other cases. That, of course, we were all excited about the opportunity that the Dobbs case represented, and they argued that in December, and then the actual ruling was released a week before they finished their session,
Yes.
Which we all remember that day as well. So that's kind of how it will work. ADF will be with you at the Supreme Court for the oral arguments, and we can all tune in on audio. I don't think that's available by video anymore. I don't. Maybe it is. Maybe it's become that way, but definitely audio. I know I've listened to several, and was on hand for a couple. So you'll have that experience.
Yes.
And then we'll all be at the courthouse for like 20 days in a row until they announce it, whatever it takes, right, to be able to hear that argument. And of course, we'll be praying for success. So if it is successful, if the Supreme Court sides with First Choice, what might that outcome mean for other pregnancy help centers, other pregnancy help organizations that have felt even the hint of target from the likes of A.G. Plotkin?
Well, I think it will provide a precedent for other attorneys general to beware that they can't harass and bully pregnancy centers because they don't agree with their convictions. And so I think a Supreme Court victory is very important, and it's certainly what we're praying for. And it doesn't mean that our case will go away. It doesn't mean that our legal battle will be done necessarily, because we could go back to federal court. But it would certainly be, from my understanding, a significant stop along the way. And just really a thrill and something we will thank God for.
I think that's exactly right. I think if we win this case, it shifts the playing field for pregnancy centers nationwide and for First Choice in specific. It'll give pregnancy centers the confidence that if they receive one of these demands, that if it's threatening their rights, that they can challenge it in federal court and get a federal hearing. And it'll also show the Attorney General here that he's going to have to answer more directly to the U.S. Supreme Court through the federal system for anything that he does. And it'll ensure that the privacy and protections of First Choice's donors are going to be decided by a federal court and not by a state court.
And if nothing else, it would hopefully mute future or blunt future attacks to not include the donor portion. I don't expect this to be a panacea win that would protect all pregnancy centers for every argument or every opportunity for attack, but at least it would take this out of the equation, because that to your point earlier, Lincoln, that's a very significant tool for intimidation that has been deployed. I know part of that is I know, Aimee, your sense of absolute commitment to the donors who kindly shared and gave freely under no compulsion or it's just ludicrous to think that they're somehow giving to Planned Parenthood when you have pictures of babies, because I don't think Planned Parenthood has those. We do, they don't. But it is a significant form of intimidation. So it's important to get at least this off of the table of tricks that the AGs can play. And we know that they're meeting together. I've seen what was it, Kamala Harris, before she was even a candidate for presidency, was meeting with abortion state AGs and specifically talked about pregnancy centers being someone to pursue. So this is in my mind, this is a vital piece of that defense. And I so appreciate, Aimee, you having the courage, your team, your board having the courage to say enough is enough. And I think that Alliance Defending Freedom is no less than a gift to the entire pregnancy health movement, as are a few of our other public interest law firms. We've been so grateful for ADF and their just courageous stand against abuses like this that have impacted pregnancy help in all kinds of ways. And so thank you for doing that. What should leaders in pregnancy help organizations take away from all of this?
I think of a couple things. One I think of is that God may call you to do something you never expected, and you've got to be, as much as you possibly can, be obedient and be faithful to Him. I remember when this started many months ago, and I remember going to the Lord in my quiet time one morning and saying, Lord, what in the world? I did not expect this, or I was not trained in this when I went to pregnancy center director school. What in the world? And He reminded me of the song In Christ Alone, and how it talks about how, I think it's in the third or fourth verse, about how Jesus, His body lay, light of the world, in darkness slain, but bursting forth in glorious day, up from the grave He rose again. And I remember it was like the Lord said to me, you know what, Aimee? I do the unexpected, and I'm always underestimated, especially by those who don't know me, but you know me, and you know what I can do, and you can trust me with this too. And I remember thinking, yes, Lord, I do. And pregnancy centers around the country, we do know the Lord. If we've been at our centers any length of time, because there have been so many times we've wondered if we're going to make it to the next day, if we're going to be able to make the rent, if we're going to be able to make payroll, if the Lord's going to provide the nurse that we need, whatever it is. So all of those experiences for 34 years that I've had of trusting God, of being called to trust God, of being on my knees and wondering and seeing Him show up and have a front seat to watching Him work, guess what? They all came in handy for this. So God may call you to do the unexpected, and you need to also realize, I think one of the things that I've learned is that everything that you do is preparation. It's all purposeful. There's not one thing that he's called you to trust him with that isn't going to be used for his glory and your good in the future. And so those are my couple of things. I guess on a practical note, I would say be careful too. Just realize that every email you write, every policy you publish, everything you have could come to light in the light of day. And you just want to be shrewd as a serpent and innocent as a dove, and just practice the best practices and call your national affiliation and ask questions and just try to do everything you possibly can in an excellent manner.
Well, I appreciate, Aimee, you talking about, the Lord is with us. We can trust him with this.
Yes.
And in effect, that's the same message that we bring to a woman who's experiencing a crisis pregnancy, right? We
Very true.
we step in with that same message, and we ask her to do the same thing that you're calling all of us to remember, is that we serve a big God and he can work with you, and we're here to help you with that.
Yes.
And that's one of the joys of the ministry that we have. And it just, when it turns around and suddenly we have to be the ones to believe that same thing, that can we trust God with it? And then he brings good partners with us, like
Yes.
Alliance Defending Freedom.
Yes.
We get to meet folks like Lincoln and others who are willing to bring their expertise into this battlefield and to help us. I'm all constantly reminded of a quote that I understand from Pericles, ancient Roman politician, who basically said, "You may not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you." And it feels like I heard that about almost 20 years ago, and I thought, wow, that's true. And it's even more true today, particularly with how the abortion has dominated our politics, particularly our elections over the last few cycles. So it's not a wonder that we're under attack, because we are doing real good work. That causes others to say, we need to put a stop to that, or we need to diminish that in some way. So thank you for standing strong. Lincoln, anything you might add to that equation to say, hey, what can pregnancy help organizations take away from this opportunity?
Yeah, I just want to say amen to everything that Aimee just said there. And yes, I do think this is an important stand for pregnancy centers to take, and to follow Aimee's encouragement and her advice that, this is, God might call you to do big things that you weren't expecting to do, but he always gives you the resources to do them. And at the same time, be wise as a serpent and innocent as a dove, and make sure that you are protecting yourself. And there's all sorts of good guidance and policies on how to handle this. And ADF is proud to stand strong with organizations like Aimee's and with you all at Heartbeat to make sure that these sorts of attacks against constitutional rights don't go any further than they should.
Yeah, amen. And I me just want to remind everybody about the Church and Ministry Alliance, connection that ADF has. That's good to get a hold of. All of the national organizations provide legal reviews as well. There are ways to make sure that you've got things in working order and in good order, because we never know when these attacks will pop up. But certainly, if you're in an abortion state, you should certainly think about that again. If you haven't thought about it in a couple of years, it's always good to do, to get some other eyes on the process to make sure that we're in good standing for whatever may come, because I'm not convinced that this is going to lessen anytime soon. I'm convinced it's only going to become more and more of a battle, but we have to push back at every opportunity. And grateful for you, Aimee, to share the story with us, and for our friends at ADF to be helping out. And stay tuned. We will be announcing whenever we hear when the time for the oral argument will be. We'll be standing with you in prayer.
Thank you.
Both you, Aimee, and whoever it is on the team that ADF is going to get that opportunity. We will be standing with you guys and believing the best for that.
Thank you. There's really no question to me that our grant at the Supreme Court is a result of prayer. We had so many people who were praying. So that's the Lord's work, and we're just grateful.
Amen. And while we call it the Supreme Court of the United States, we're also mindful that there is a greater court than that, and there is a righteous judge that is at the head of that court, and it's to him that we really lean in the most. And so we just trust that His Holy Spirit will guide those that are justices in our land and in this on this earth, and hopefully we'll see righteousness prevail through this. And again, thank you guys for standing strong, and we'll be hopefully maybe reconnecting and talking about what happens next.
Thank you, Jor-El, so much.
Amen. Thank you so much for your time, Jor-El.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being on with us today and talking about this case in a lot of detail. I'm so glad we were able to highlight the Church and Ministry Alliance. We actually had a podcast on that just a month or two ago, I think it was. And so I can link to that in the show notes as well as that membership information because that is so helpful. As Aimee said, it was great to be prepared and have that already in place. So what a cool testament to how that alliance works. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast. We'll have more coming your way. We love covering stories like this so that we can keep everyone in the know. It's important that we all kind of stand together and stand against those attacks. And we want to thank you all for listening to this episode of the Pregnancy Help Podcast. And we wish you all a wonderful rest of your day.